My name's Ian Green. I'm the Chief Executive of Terence Higgins Trust, and I'm delighted to be joined by Stephen Doughty, the Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on HIV and AIDS, and John Ashworth, the Shadow Health Secretary. And I just want to say thank you to both of you for your support in our recent campaign to enable people living with HIV who haven't disclosed their status to their GP to get vaccinated for COVID-19 at the right time. I mean, as you will both know, that people living with HIV are in tier 6 and should be being vaccinated now. But for about 20% of people living with HIV, they've not disclosed their HIV status to their general practitioner. All sorts of reasons for that. One of the significant reasons is around the stigma that still is associated with HIV. And the real challenge is if the current approach were maintained, or the original approach were maintained, it may be some time before they had the protection that they need from COVID-19. And so, Stephen, I think you originally put the parliamentary question in place. It'd be good to get a bit of an understanding of what motivated you to do that.
Yeah, well, it was working with THT. I mean, as the all-party group, we work very closely with a range of organisations across the sector, including yourselves, and are there to be, the voice of people living with HIV in Parliament, with a fantastic group of cross-party MPs and peers who've been campaigning on this issue. I think it's one of the oldest groups in Parliament, actually, since the early days of the epidemic. And when we get these types of concerns raised with us on behalf of people living with HIV, obviously we want to seek to try and bring those to the attention of ministers and others, and obviously put the questions down to get the ball rolling, but also started looking at how we could raise this in other ways. For example, with my colleagues in the Welsh Government as well. And it was great to see Vaughan Gethin, the Welsh Health Minister, come out on this first, actually, to make sure this change went through. So, but as ever, it's been great to work with John and with colleagues across the Commons as well, because I know there's a huge amount of support for people living with HIV and for dealing with issues like these when they come up.
And John, I'm aware that you asked a question of Matt Hancock. You then did an article in the Iron newspaper. There was on Times Radio, and then there's an incredible piece on LBC when you reserved a question for the vaccine minister when on Ian Dale's programme. Why did you think this was so important?
Well, I mean, it's a tribute to Terence Higgins Trust, because I was speaking to you guys throughout HIV Test Week, and obviously an important issue that I, as the Shadow Health Secretary, wanted to raise the issues around HIV testing. And then it was just in the conversations I was having with you that you raised this with me. And I got to be honest, until that point, I hadn't quite appreciated this issue. The penny hadn't dropped with me that the JCVI and in the way in which they were rolling out the vaccination and the way the NHS was rolling it out, that there was this gap which could have meant a number of people living with HIV would not be called up for their vaccination at the moment that they would need to be vaccinated. And I was just absolutely appalled and shocked, and I couldn't believe it. And I don't think this was a deliberate sort of gap in access to vaccination. I just think it was one of those things that perhaps the powers that be hadn't quite appreciated or understood. So as soon as you raised it with me, I raised it at my next opportunity in the House of Commons, which was a day or so later. I raised it directly with Matt Hancock. He sort of sounded sympathetic but didn't give a clear answer. And then I used every opportunity I could find over the following sort of week, 10 days or so, to keep banging away at it, including writing an article for a newspaper. And then I went on Ian Dale's show, which I actually, I go on regularly, and he's, he might not agree with me on lots of things, but I think he thinks I'm a decent sort of bloke. And he said, by the way, we've got the vaccine minister on next. What would you ask him? And I thought, I'd ask him about this.
Yeah.
So I took that opportunity to record the question for the vaccine minister and he came on sort of half an hour later, and again he gave a very sympathetic answer. So every time we raised it, we were not hitting a brick wall. We were making a little bit of progress, and eventually NHS England, the Department of Health, made the necessary changes, and I'm just so delighted and so thrilled that we were able to do it, because it will make a difference to a significant number of people.
Yeah, I mean, we have contact, as you can imagine, with lots of people living with HIV, and many of them were flagging up either through THT Direct, the national helpline, or through the Community Forum, the online peer support group. There are real worries about the fact that do they need to disclose their HIV status to their GP in order to make sure that they are being vaccinated at the right time. And there's all sorts of challenges for people about that. There shouldn't be, but there still are. But also, really importantly, making sure that that some other sort of approach was put in place. And so that so many people are so very relieved that this has now happened. So on behalf of all of them, thank you so much for doing that, both of you. It really is appreciated. I guess there's one thing I'm going to take the opportunity just to ask you for a bit more support. I think what's been put in place now is a really good fix for now. I think eventually, particularly if we're talking about boosters required for COVID as well, the ideal place for people who have not engaged with their general practitioner about HIV would be for them to be vaccinated or have a booster at their HIV clinic, rather than via their HIV clinic into hospital hubs. And so I think we're going to be sort of trying to make sure that we don't lose that opportunity over the course of the next 6 months or so. I think where we are now is a great place, but I think that we need to make sure that we get to a different place, perhaps by the autumn, where this is just routine in an HIV clinic.
Absolutely, and you'd have my full support on that, and we can continue to raise that as an issue. I think you're right that the way the COVID virus seems to be developing with the variations in them, it probably does suggest that we will need booster jabs at some point. The science is still unclear whether it be this autumn or next autumn, but I think we all expect that this isn't a one-off vaccination, which like a vaccination for sort of some of the things that we get as children for sort of the polios and diphtherias, that sort of it's not a hard stop. I think we'll have to have booster jabs at some point. So we need to make sure that when that moment comes around, that these issues are ironed out. So I am very happy and keen to work closely with you again in voicing those concerns and putting pressure on NHS England and ministers to make sure that the pathway to those next vaccinations is as smooth as possible and can be done at HIV clinics, as you suggest.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the wider issue, of course, as I'm sure you agree, Ian, is the wider issue of stigma and the stigma that people face. And I think, when you look at things like the stigma index, when you look at what people tell us about some of their wider access to health services, if they are living with HIV, I think that's a challenge that we all need to be continuing to fight on, to ensure that people don't feel like they can't go to access health services and that they're not discriminated against in that way. So there's a bigger battle here, and obviously you'll have our full support in that.
Well, listen, I'm very grateful again to both of you. Thank you so much for your time. I think it's really important that when parliamentarians and politicians have acted so positively, that we do take the opportunity of thanking you. And I know sometimes that you don't get thanked as often as you should, but so that's why I think it was really important to have the call today. So again, thank you very much for your time. Do appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for everything you do.
Thank you.